Okay, we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. Welcome to the California Center for Ethics and Policy's 2023 Spring 2023 Speaker Series. My name is Lorraine Hom. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at Cal Poly Pomona, and I am the CCEP faculty fellow for this year. And so on behalf of CCEP, I want to thank you all for being here. I think this is our last event for the year and for the semester. So we're really excited to have you all here today. And thank you for those of you who've been here, who've been going to our different events throughout the semester. Before we get started, for those of you who are kind of new to CCEP, I just wanted to briefly introduce the center. Each year, CCEP organizes different programming, including a student fellowship program, a spring seminar class, which I actually am teaching this semester, and an annual speaker series. And we do this around a theme that is of national and global importance, but especially within the California context. And so this year's theme is migration and mobility justice. And today we'll be unpacking and discussing this theme within a discussion about the street vendor community and activism in Los Angeles. And we're going to be doing this with our amazing guest speakers today, Carla De Paz, Rosia Rosales, and Doug Smith, and moderated by my colleague, Alvaro Horta. I'd also wanted to briefly recognize a few individuals who are involved with CCEP, and I think they might be kind of floating in the audience out there. Corey Aragon, Brady Collins, Brian Kim, and Alex Madva, and Vanessa Aldez, who big shout out to Vanessa for helping so much with the events for this, not just today's, but throughout this semester and the previous years as well too. I'm also dropping some links in the chat right now that are links to CCEP socials and to sign up to our listserv, so you can kind of be in the know about the different events that we'll have in the next academic year, as well as links to our podcast series. And next year, we actually will be releasing some student run podcasts. They're creating some episodes around this theme of mobility and migration and mobility justice. So we're really excited about that. And so you can keep a lookout for that in the fall. So now I want to briefly introduce Alvaro Horta, who will be moderating the event today. It's a really brief bio. He's done a lot, but he's associate professor in urban and regional planning and ethnic and women's studies at Cal Poly Pomona. As an interdisciplinary scholar, he teaches and conducts research on community and economic development, Chicano and Latino studies, immigration and Mexican diaspora, social movements and social networks, and the informal economy. He has many different publications, but most notably, he's published a few books, including Reframing the Latino Immigration Debate Towards a Humanistic Paradigm and Latino Immigrant Communities in the Xenophobic Era of Trump and Beyond. So I'm going to hand it off to you, Alvaro, fearless leader, to introduce our topic of the panel today and our speakers, and to moderate our Q&A after the presentations.
Thank you, Professor. I really appreciate it. They told me if I do this, I'll get some free tacos. So uno de lengua sin cebolla, please. I don't know about the cebolla. So the title, this is an amazing title. I really love the title of the organizers put together, Resisting Illegality in the Los Angeles Street Vendor Community. And today we have three brilliant presenters. I'm actually jealous because they're all smarter than me, so I feel bad that I'm even presenting them because I'm not up to their par. But that said, I want to say that because I know that they're famous, and I want to get in their good graces. So I'm just going to keep their bios really, really short because I want them to elaborate on what they want to say about themselves, and then so we have more time, with the content here. And some will do PowerPoint, some will not. So it depends on what they want to do. So first, we're going to start off with Professor Rosia Rosales, and she's a professor, associate professor, Department of Sociology at UC Irvine. She has an incredible book it's titled Fruteros, looking at street vending, illegality, and ethnic communities. I did buy the book, so I want her to sign it. So that's the only reason I agreed to this. Besides the taco, PhD in sociology at UCLA. Actually, everybody's related to UCLA here. The panelists, go Bruins, even though we can't win any championships, probably in soccer. And also AB in sociology from Princeton University. I can't pronounce that, cum laude, so it's one of those, I think, for fancy, smart people. And then second, we have an organizer. I was a former organizer, Carla de Paz. She is the director of organizational strategy at Community Power Collective. And she's been organizing for over 10 years. And she's was one of the organizers of the LA Street vending campaign, and is what we're going to talk about today. And she holds a bachelor's degree from UCLA in political science. And then Doug Smith. I've known Doug Smith for a while. He's a director of public policy and coalition building at Public Council. It's an amazing public interest organization in downtown Los Angeles. He's been very involved with taking my phone calls because someone's calling me, and organizing, not just within the field of law, but also organizing outside of it, and with the campaign for street vendors and other colleagues of ours here in this panel. He holds a master's in urban planning from UCLA. I don't know what's up with all the UCLA people, and a JD as well. So it's a double degree. So if you want to get, it's like 2 degrees for the price of one at UCLA. It's a great program. I got rejected, so I'm not even going to bring that up because it's going to get me emotional. Within the context, and actually something that I wanted to include, and hopefully our guests or our panelists can also include, is the question of also informality. So we have this idea of street vending, illegality in terms of the city, the governments criminalizing street vendors, but also this idea of informality. Like, what does that mean? Why is it important? Why should we regulate street vending? I've always advocated against regulating, against legalizing, because it only penalizes them. So these are a lot of issues that hopefully we can discuss in the presentations, but also in the Q&A. So we're just going to start with Professor Rocio Rosales. She'll do PowerPoint for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll pass it on to Carla de Paz. Take it away, Profesora.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly share my screen, and so maybe somebody can give me a thumbs up if it looks good. All right. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I think it's a really lovely panel with people who have a lot of experience with organizing and helping the street vendor campaign. What I'm going to talk about today really deals with the research that I did as a graduate student at UCLA when I was getting my PhD in sociology. I'm an ethnographer. I wanted to do an ethnography about street vendors, and I focused in on fruteros. And so many years later, that dissertation work turned into this book, Fruteros, Street Vending, Illegality, and Ethnic Community in Los Angeles. And so I preface this by saying, like, this is a book that I wrote about a small community of street vendors and how they survived on the streets of Los Angeles. They really, and I can talk about this in the Q&A, but like, they were very much outside of the legalization campaign, the movement, which started about 2009. I started following the vendors in about 2005, 2006. So even before the campaign kind of got its legs. And I remember the vendors being approached by organizers to participate, and they all had their distinct reasons for not participating. And those reasons will make a lot more sense after I finish my talk, and we can talk about it in the Q&A. But fruteros are such a large presence in Los Angeles. The presence of fruteros on street corners throughout Los Angeles actually represents a confluence of larger social and economic forces. Fruteros are labor migrants who have crossed international borders in search of improved economic opportunities, but because most of them are undocumented, they confront obstacles that prevent them from legally participating in the formal economy. Now, I start my book with a story about Jesus, and Jesus was the first frutero that I visited regularly and befriended. He was clearly perplexed at my presence in the beginning because I asked too many questions and I stood too close to him because his infrequent and soft-spoken responses were barely audible over the constant din of street traffic. When I met him, he was 21 years old. In 2006, he was slender, dark-skinned, with a wispy-haired mustache and goatee. And one of the very first conversations we had went like this. I asked him, "Do you work every day?" And he said, in Spanish, "I keep bank hours." And I made a puzzled face. And with his knife, he gestured towards the bank that he was standing in front of. And he said he worked 6 days a week, reduced hours on Saturdays, and he was closed on Sundays. This was, of course, a very funny sort of introduction to our friendship. One day, a day later, after a couple of months of visiting him, I went to his street corner and I didn't find him. But what I did find was a pile of melting crushed ice on the corner where he usually stood. And I thought, had I just missed him? What happened? Why is the ice here? And it was a Salvadoran parking lot attendant who answered all my questions that day. The health department had done a sweep. They had dumped Jesus's produce into large trash bags before confiscating his push cart. They had asked him to dump all the remaining ice onto the sidewalk. And I asked the parking lot attendant, did they arrest him? Thinking immediately that it could be related to immigration and customs enforcement. I was told that Jesus had been given a ticket and picked up by some of his friends shortly after this crackdown. I don't understand, I told the parking lot attendant. And the attendant just shrugged and he said bluntly, it's illegal to be a street vendor. At that point, I had no sense of how crackdowns worked or how often they occurred. I was immediately full of questions because Los Angeles is full of street vendors. The questions I had that day only scratched the surface of a really complicated relationship that street vendors had with the city. But what proved more interesting across the many years that I spent with these fruit vendors was the Paisano network that helped them withstand this and other assaults to their economic and social well-being. And it was that complicated web of social relations, the Paisano or compatriot network, that captured my sociological imagination and attention. Now, we know that fruteros have a very large presence throughout the city. It's very hard to go many blocks without seeing their rainbow color umbrellas. And these are just a few of the images of the vendors across Los Angeles. In my work, I charted this network of fruteros. These are all pseudonyms, but it shows you the different relationships that they had. The people that I ended up spending the most time with were Cristian, Carmen, Manuel, and Gonzalo. And from those 4 people, I charted all these other people that they were connected to. Now, even though a fruit vendor works alone on a street corner, he is part of a large network of fruteros who are very often his paisanos or hometown associates. As you can see here, there's an overrepresentation of Dos Mundos, Puebla. Dos Mundos is a pseudonym for the town that many of the fruit vendors were from. That overrepresentation of Poblanos is not an accident. It shows how networked this occupation was. So Dos Mundos, the hometown of maybe 1,500 people in Puebla, makes a very noticeable appearance. The boxes here are in dashed boxes. As you can see, Gerardo on the bottom right-hand corner was a labor recruiter, a coyote, and he was central to this concentration of vendors from Puebla. He not only helped recruit, transport, and bring vendors into the city, he, along with his family, also employed vendors and housed vendors when they arrived. So it wasn't uncommon for a vendor to leave their small town in Puebla on a Friday and be working on a Monday as a street vendor on the streets of LA. That's how quickly it was. They get here and they start working. So street vending has a long history among recently arrived immigrants. In our collective imagination, we may think of turn of the century New York and immigrant street peddlers. And sure, New York has a lot of street vendors and they're very well known for that. But one of the things that I note is, whereas New York has an estimated 20,000 street vendors selling food, flour, books, and art and other products, Los Angeles has an estimated 50,000 street vendors, of which 10,000 sell food products, and of these, 1,000 of them are fruteros, like the ones that I followed. Throughout my time in the field, again, this is 2006 to 2012, Los Angeles was the largest American city that prohibited street vending. And this prohibition often resulted in the confiscation of product, push carts, in fines and citations, and at times arrest as well. Street vendors were subject to scrutiny, citation, and arrest based on laws and regulations from various city, county, and state agencies. And enforcement was carried out by the LAPD, the Department of Public Works, and the LA County Department of Public Health in joint operations. So many fruit vendors who I followed were also undocumented, and so they were subject to federal immigration laws that prohibited their presence in the country. And one of these arrests might inadvertently trigger an ICE hold if they were arrested. So one of the things that I realized very early on is how many of the fruit vendors were new arrivals. Throughout my time in the field, it was not uncommon to hear street vendors working on the street corner just days after arriving into the US. At the end of the workday, as I rode around in a pickup truck with Christian and Carmen, they would point out other fruteros working on corners, and we would drive by and Carmen would give me a brief introduction to them. She would say, that guy works for Raul, he's been here for a few weeks. That one doesn't know how to hold a knife yet because he's new, or he just got here, he's from Dos Mundos also, which was Christian's hometown. Although I didn't select this population of workers knowing that they would be such recent arrivals in an occupation of heavily networked paisanos, these characteristics proved to be important when scrutinizing the impact of social networks on immigrant arrivals. Now, this is just a sense of this is to give you a sense of what I did when I was in the field. I was in the field for 6 years between 2006 and 2012, hanging out on street corners, interviewing vendors, helping them, set up their fruit carts, take down their fruit carts. I would wake up early in the morning to go to the wholesale produce market at 6 in the morning. And then throughout these years, I did 22 in-depth interviews with the vendors, hours of recordings that I had from standing on street corners with them. I also had participant observation. I worked with fruit vendors who would often leave me in charge of their fruit cart, and I would make the worst fruit salads. And so that was part of the experience as well. And then towards the end of my field work, I also went to Mexico, to Dos Mundos and Mexico City, where most of the vendors are from, to interview the families who were left behind, to get a sense of what they left and how they remitted. And so that was a very insightful experience for me to be able to see where they came from. And the book that I ended up writing was this one. So my book really focuses on immigrant fruteros, and it really tells the story of ethnic community in challenging times. It's an account of their lives as migrants, as workers, and as members of an ethnic community. More than anything, it's a story of immigrant adaptation among entrepreneurial newcomers in a hostile context of reception. Now, we may think that Los Angeles, because it has so many immigrants, is an immigrant-friendly city, and we talk often about Los Angeles in those terms. But what a lot of scholars have said is an immigrant-friendly city can still be hostile to newcomers if it has a lot of anti-poverty, anti-immigrant legislation. And so Ivan Light, who's a sociologist at UCLA, has talked about local laws that inadvertently become immigrant laws that deflect immigrants to other cities. And a lot of these are like anti-poverty local laws. And this is the case for street vendors. The laws that exist in LA are not friendly towards street vendors, and most of the street vendors in the city are immigrant newcomers. And so because of this hostile context of reception, it's their hometown or paisano ties that define their work in personal and in very powerful and meaningful ways. And so this is why the book focuses on those social networks. But my book talks about social networks in a way that contradicts the way that migration scholars have conceptualized immigrant networks. So migration scholars have documented for many, many years how newcomers lean on their communities of paisanos for assistance upon arrival. Immigrant social networks and the social capital they provide are important sources of support in the lives of newcomers. And the positive functions of social networks, especially among newly arrived immigrants, have received a lot of scholarly attention. But in my work, I move beyond how immigrants get jobs using their networks and instead focus on those social networks both build and bind paisanos. And so I argue that a positive focus on networks can often flatten really complex narratives and obscure the exploitative undercurrents that also constitute it. The relationship that people have are often complicated and dynamic, and it's unrealistic to assume that ties between individuals offer only benefits, especially when vulnerabilities related to context of reception, immigration status, class, and gender are present, all of which are happening in this group of vendors that I study. And so in my work, I conceptualize this concept of the ethnic cage. And so this is how I make sense of what's going on among these vendors, who again are not participating in an organizing movement, who are subject to all these laws and who are constantly trying to survive. So I talk about the ethnic cage to make sense of the benefits and the detriments of social networks and social capital. So I argue that for some, this ethnic cage is large and visible and functions to corral community while keeping threats at bay. But for others, the ethnic cage is small, visible, and functions to confine the individual while that same community does harm. In my book, I talk about different types of exploitation, including bosses who bring over vendors to work and then don't pay them for many months on end. And so that's how the community does harm within this cage. As I show throughout my book, the ethnic cage can serve different functions at different times for the same individual, because we know that personal, social, and work relationships are dynamic. The Mexican immigrants in my study open doors for newcomers, both to offer help and to exploit. And this is the ethnic cage. Newcomers are not turned away. Their paisanaje grants them entry, but it doesn't guarantee benevolence. So like others before me who stumbled on unsavory aspects of immigrant life, this isn't the story that I wanted to tell or that I sought out to record. But fieldwork across several years revealed how structural hardship inspired both ingenuity among fruteros, but how this ingenuity also helped and harmed other paisanos or compatriots. And across the years, these 6 years that I spent with vendors, I was able to see both the promise and pain of community through the vendors themselves. And so I hope this gives you a sense of what the book is about and the many complexities that exist with within this community. Of course, it's an ethnography, so the stories that I tell are very personal, and across years, I will forever be indebted to the vendors who, let me spend so much time with them and document their various struggles. And I'm very happy to answer some questions about this and how it relates to those vendors who chose to join the campaign and kind of fight back against the structural hardship created by the city with all their loss. So thank you.
Let's see those virtual applauses, people. I need my book signed, so the more applauses, the more gets signed. Pues like we say in East LA, muchas gracias, Profe. I really appreciate the overview that you provided for us before we get into the campaign and also the legal issues associated with us. We wanted for you to provide us an overview. In this case, it's a very specific segment within street vendors, right? The fruteros, and looking at some of the labor characteristics in terms of the informal ethnic niche. Also, the importance of the migrant networks are key. This is something that anybody who studies migration should be aware of. And this idea of paisaje. So migrant networks is not just like, people coming from Mexico or El Salvador, or they come from a certain city in a certain town, a certain like pueblo, just like it's very, very specific in how they recruit and how they bring people over through different ways. And this is Japanese did this before, and Chinese and Koreans and all these other ethnic groups. And also shedding light on the oppressive state, right? There's people that want to overthrow sedition, want to overthrow the government of the United States on January 6th. And a lot of them, nothing happens to them. People want to make a living and they get arrested, and some of them get deported just to try to make a living. So let's put things in context. These are brown people we're talking about. These are immigrants. They're not workers. They're entrepreneurs. You know, they're people that are self-employed, and within them, they do hire some workers. So just to characterize that. So in our next, so muchas gracias otra vez. In our next presenter, Carla de Paz, she'll talk to us about the campaign to legalize street vending, to decriminalize them, and the importance of coalition building as well. So it's just all these different groups coming together, and for that one common cause is how is it that we deal with these individuals who are here to make our lives better. They are not a burden on society. They are actually beautifying and enriching our community. So we need to embrace them, and we need to embrace and salute organizers like Carla to help defend those that are defenseless. Take it away, Carla.
Thank you very much. And just want to make sure y'all can see my screen. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Alvaro. Like you mentioned, I'm Carla de Paz. I'm the Director of Organizational Strategy at Community Power Collective, and our organization has been working with street vendors for many, many years. We are on the steering committee for both the LA Street Vendor Campaign and the California Street Vendor Campaign. And I'm going to give you a brief history of all the amazing work both campaigns have been doing. Our team at CPC is a team that's on the ground every day and has been on the ground every day since 2008, 2009, talking to vendors and building power with vendors. So it's right now it's a team of 5 engaging with about 2,500 vendors in a year on different street vendor issues and these campaigns. So we as an organization, CPC, like our mission is to build power with tenants and workers in the informal economy, most notably street vendors, to win community control of land and housing. And then in terms of our street vendor program, our goal is to make sure that vendors can do their work without criminalization. Earlier, Alvaro, you brought up a good point on like, what's the need for regulation, right? And does like legalization actually like help vendors, or does it harm them with regulations? And that's a question that we have been asking ourselves throughout these 10+ years. But for us, the most important piece is the decriminalization and making sure that people can work without being criminalized. So I'll jump into the history. Here we go. Yeah, so it all started in 2008 in East LA. There was a group of doñas, of vendors, who used to be part of this informal market, the Breed Street Market. It was on Cesar Chavez and Breed Street, where there's a Bank of America now and a Walgreens, and they used to have this amazing informal market. They would get together on weekends in the evenings, and then they started noticing changes in the community, right? So with investment of the metro lines, with investment that was bringing in, we start seeing gentrification. We start seeing a new Walgreens that took the place of a very beloved local market. We see a new police station on First Street. So we start getting a lot of complaints about this informal market. And vendors organized. They got together and they actually showed up at the doorstep of the East LA Community Corporation, one of our members of the campaign, to say, hey, we need help with this because we're being criminalized, we're getting ticketed. We don't understand, like, if we don't pay these tickets, I don't have money. I'm being told I have to go to court. Like, what's happening? So that kind of kicked off the campaign. East LA Community Corporation started meeting with these vendors on a monthly basis, and started reaching out to partner organizations to figure out, like, what's the issue? Like, why is it that vendors are being ticketed, criminalized? Reached out to the local council member, who was Jose Huizar at the time, and his response was like, it's just never gonna be legal. It's just illegal. It's an informal economy, and there's like, people just have to live that way. That was his honest response at the time. So he spent a few years just, reaching out to vendors in South LA to see if they were experiencing the same thing, and they were. And then just talking to partners about how do we address this issue. And that led to the creation of the LA Street Vendor Campaign around 2011. There was other organizations that joined with like policy support. You'll hear from Doug in a little bit. Public Council joined, food justice organizations like the LA Food Policy Council, and then organizations that were doing work on economic justice like Inclusive Action. And these groups started meeting to really figure out what was the issue. And we realized that there was actually a municipal code that made it illegal for vendors to vend. It was illegal for vendors to stand on sidewalks and sell anything. So it gets really confusing, and I'll try to make it clear because it gets confusing as we start talking about all the laws and what is what. But it didn't matter if a vendor like a frutero might be able to go get their permit to vend fruit and have a health permit to vend, but they can go vend like at a festival, they can go vend at a private event. They couldn't legally be on a sidewalk vending. So this municipal code for the city made it illegal to vend anything on the sidewalk. So we're like, okay, that's something that needs to change, right? So we continued organizing. We're like, in order to actually make these changes, we need to make sure that electeds are hearing from vendors, from the folks who are most impacted. And we started developing like a really, really strong group of vendors, both in East LA and South LA, meeting with about 150 vendors every month to figure out these issues and to try to convince the council members in their districts to take this on as an issue that they cared about. Yeah, so in 2013, we were able to get Councilmember Price and Councilmember Wisad, after he said that it would never change, to actually introduce a motion in LA City Council to start investigating how to legalize street vending. And that was like the kickoff of the policy campaign. And then from 2013 to 2016, it was just us going to committee meetings, like turning out hundreds of vendors. We would fill up city council with 200 vendors from South LA and Boyle Heights. And then we started expanding to the Valley, to the San Fernando Valley, Pacoima. As this policy was going through committee, Economic Development Committee, Safety Committee, every committee, they just kind of stalled it for a long time. Then around 2016, missing a couple bullet points here, but I'll say them out loud. Around 2016, something happened that impacted all of us. Trump got elected, and there was a lot of fear among us, right, of what it would mean for immigrant communities. Again, at the time, it was illegal to sell anything on the sidewalk. And not only was it illegal, but it was actually criminal. So you could get a misdemeanor for selling on the sidewalk. And we started hearing this rhetoric, right, from Trump that anyone with any criminal background was going to get deported. So like Rocio said earlier, we already had stories of people who had been arrested for selling elotes, arrested for selling tamales, and some of them had already been deported. And now this fear was growing more and more because of Trump. So we really shifted gears to think about the decriminalization aspect of things, right? Like, what does it mean to remove this criminal component? Maybe we're not going to be able to legalize vending right away. Maybe we're not going to be able to change all the municipal codes that make it illegal, but we should definitely try to change the thing that makes it a crime, that makes it a misdemeanor. We were able to work with then State Senator Lara, who was on his way out from the state legislature. It was his last term, and he actually reached out to us and was like, I really want to, support something that matters for our community. And we were able to work on SB 946, which decriminalized street vending across California. So this took away just the criminal component of you selling something on sidewalks and parks. It didn't make it legal necessarily. It did encourage cities to create legal programs, but it didn't, in and of itself, didn't make it legal. It just said it's no longer a crime. Like, if you get a ticket for selling on the sidewalk, it's going to be an administrative citation. And that will not result in you having to go to court or be stuck in the criminal system. So that was a big deal for us to be able to win that. However, it is complicated when it comes to food vendors. And this is where I say it's complicated. So this only applied to the act of selling something on the sidewalk. If you're selling food, whether it's on the sidewalk, whether it's out of your house, whether it's at a restaurant, there's a whole nother layer of laws that are mandated by the California Retail Food Code that require you to have health permits and go through health inspection. So it's no longer a crime to do the act of selling something on the sidewalk, but it's still a crime to sell food without health permits, because that, again, that's a whole nother set of laws, and we'll talk more about that. You know, coming off of this big win in the state legislature in 2018, the city of LA was like, okay, we need to get our, we need to get it together. You know, these vendors have been like pushing us for so many years. They were able to win this stuff at the statewide level. It just gave it so much attention. And it also encouraged cities to legalize vending. So the city finally was able to move the legalization of street vending. So again, now it's no longer a crime, but now the city of LA is saying we're actually gonna allow for vendors to vend without getting citations. And they took some time to create the program, but they landed on a program where there isn't a limit of vendors. It's not like, oh, only X amount of vendors can be on a sidewalk, but there is a list of rules that sometimes makes it difficult, right? So you can't set up within certain feet of a bus stop. You can't set up if there's a red curb. You can't set up if there is a parking meter. So again, like it was a big win for us that they didn't set up like a limit of how many vendors like they have in New York. They actually have a limit, but they did create some arbitrary rules that we didn't like. They also included 8 no vending zones, including like 500, like a 500-foot radius around Hollywood, the Hollywood Walk of Fame, Hollywood Bowl, Dodger Stadium, Placita Olvera. So some of those areas, which we also do not love, and we will talk, I'm sure Doug will talk about it more when he goes over his part of what we're doing to address that. And then they set up a cost of $249 for you to get your permit to vend. And that cost was going to go up after a year, but we were able to stop that. Again, this is just a cost for being a vendor in the city of LA. So if I'm selling clothes, if I'm selling, housewares, tools, I establish myself as a business. I get my business license, and then I go pay $249 to get my permit, and I can sell wherever I want in the city of LA on a sidewalk, as long as it fits those rules and regulations, right? I'm not selling on a red curb or next to a bus stop. It's not easy, but it is doable. And we've been able to help thousands of vendors, merchandise vendors, get their permits, and they're selling legally now. If you're a food vendor, again, there's this whole other layer that makes it very complicated, because you have to have health permits before the city will even give you a permit for selling in the city. So we realized after being able to win all these wins that vendors that are selling food were left out, right? We are noticing that we're getting hundreds and hundreds of merchandise vendors getting permits, but food vendors, we were doing 2 a month, maybe. And at some point there was I don't know, 1,500 vendors that had permits, and only 20 of them were food vendors. It was really hard. It was impossible, because although we had decriminalized vending across the state, legalized vending in the city of LA, the process of getting health permits was almost impossible for vendors to actually access those health permits, because the state law was not made with vendors in mind. It was asking vendors to have equipment, and when you put all the pieces that it requires, it's a cart that weighs a ton and stretches 12 feet wide, and it doesn't fit on a sidewalk. So this is actually a report that Public Counsel published, and I'm sure Doug is going to talk more about it, that kicked off our research and our advocacy on finishing the legalization of street vending, which meant including food vendors. So then 2020 hits, we're doing this research, we're kind of setting up advocacy for making sure that food vendors also reap the benefits of legalization and decriminalization. Then we have the pandemic, and we have to shift. One of the things we did was just continue to advocate for an extension of the 249 costs in the city, because vendors got hit really hard. It was going to be impossible for folks to pay almost double the amount. We, as a coalition, we were also able to fundraise over $1 million for a vendor emergency fund So we were doing just a lot of like direct service, cash aid for vendors who were left out of any, were left out of many government programs, you know? And then in 2022, we created a statewide coalition to address this issue of food vendors statewide. So California Street Vendor Campaign had the goal of changing the California Retail Food Code so that it actually included vendors and it made it possible for them to obtain their health permits. And we could do a whole presentation on what that means and what that looks like, but that would take a long, long time. But the gist of it is that it would decriminalize food street vending. So just like we did with the previous state law, this one actually would apply to the act of selling food on the sidewalk. So again, even if you didn't get a permit, it would no longer be a crime for you to sell food on the sidewalk. You'd still get tickets, but not a criminal citation. It also changed the way, like equipment requirements, so that it made it easier for folks to actually have access to a cart that they need, or have access to a commissary, or have access to a place where they can cook their food, or be able to cook their food at home in some cases. So we did that all of 2022. We won, which was amazing. We had hundreds of vendors up in Sacramento multiple times doing testimony. We had vendors from the Guatemalan food market in Westlake MacArthur Park. Mayan women from Guatemala give testimony on, you know, how this was needed and how this impacted them. And we won, and now we're in an implementation phase of this statewide law that, I mean, it's going to change the game across California, not just in LA, right? But now us kind of coming back to LA and working with the county health department on making the local changes they need to make. And then also doing a lot of work in the city around this no vending zones and trying to make changes to the rules and regulations that they have to continue to create a more equitable program for street vendors. And I'll talk real quickly through just some of, like, you know, the learnings and the big highlights of how we're able to accomplish this. Just building a strong coalition of folks with different skills. So we were the organizing folks on the ground, building leadership, but there's other folks in our coalition that know a lot about technical assistance and small business support and connecting vendors to that work. And then again, public counsel being the experts on policy development and legal advocacy. So it was really good to have such a strong coalition with different expertise. In terms of the organizing, our team is out there every single day meeting vendors where they are on the streets. We have lots of hot dogs and lots of pupusas to be able to talk to folks. Because you just got to get there, you know, where folks are at and not waste their time, you know. So we've established monthly meetings in vendor hubs. We have 27 vendor hubs across LA County, where every month from 50 to 150 vendors in each meeting are meeting to discuss their issues. We help establish leadership committees in each one of those vendor hubs. So the vendors are actually leading, we're just supporting their leadership and getting themselves organized and getting informed on the law. And then this idea of special vending districts, we can talk about it more later. Instead of having these no vending zones, we've been advocating for special vending districts where the city and we can work together to establish special rules, since these are areas that have a lot of vending, which is one of the issues for the city, that they think it's too many vendors in one area. And then lastly, just organizing, just direct action and mobilizing. You know, one of the reasons we were able to get so much attention is because we had 200 to 300 vendors in City Hall every time this issue came up. And even at one point when we weren't being listened, we planned a civil disobedience of women organizers and vendors getting arrested. You'll see that picture at the bottom, to bring attention to this issue as a women's issue, because there's so many women vendors who are being abused or being extorted because this work is illegal and they feel like they have nowhere to go. So just want to highlight all the direct action and mobilizing work that we've been able to do. And that's it.
Virtual applause, everybody. That was fantastic. Whenever we think about leaders, let's not think about Wizard because he's going to jail, and really Thomas, he's going to jail too. I think they're going to be roommates. And other white city council members are going to jail too. So our leaders, as far as I'm concerned, are the grassroots organizers like Carla, this is the what Sotomayor said, the wise Latinas. Those are our leaders as far as I'm concerned. So let's give props to those on the ground, those that are there fighting for those that are voiceless. Just some really quick points. First, I really appreciate how you focus on my motherland, East LA. Number two, the decriminalization is key, which I support. I mean, this is when I was an organizer with the gardeners when they wanted to send them to jail for using a leaf blower. Scott Cummings, our friend with Doug, he was key in helping us with that. We have to decriminalize this. A few more non-rank order points. The other thing we have to think about is if capitalism produces informality, which it does, why do we punish it? Okay. Think critical, people, y'all that are taking my class, make sure you answer these questions or else I'm going to fail you because I'm like a PhD professor. I'm in Portland now. I'm not in East LA anymore. We're not in Kansas anymore. And the other thing is that this is a country of free enterprise. We love free enterprise. But not for brown people. Because street vending is free enterprise, people. This is capitalism at its best. And Dr. Rocio talked about the good and bad and the ugly of that. But this is capitalism. This is entrepreneurship. So either we're a free enterprise country or we're not. Or only for white people? What about for brown people? What about for immigrants? So let's get down to it, right? Now, the permitting is one thing. So I'm against the criminalization, but we have to be careful with the permits because the permits, it creates classes. So now we have those with permits and those without permits. And we see this in what happens in New York, where you have unintended consequences, and then you create like a black market, those selling the permits. And segueing into that, because I'm not a lawyer and I might get arrested after these comments, I need a raise, so I shouldn't be so critical about capitalism. I love capitalism. Actually, he's a professor too. He teaches classes at the law school. My good friend Doug, take it away.
Yeah, thank you all. And I'm gonna see if I can share screen here. Is that okay? Can you all see that? Wonderful. So thanks again for having me. I'm really excited and honored to be part of this conversation. My name is Doug Smith, he, him. I'm the Director of Policy and Coalition Building at Public Counsel. I'm also a visiting professor at Occidental, and I practice and occasionally write and teach about movement lawyering, which is a particular model of lawyering in support of grassroots-led movement building. And I'll get into this in greater detail in a moment. But in this work, I've had the enormous privilege of working with street vendors and with Carla and the LA Street Vendor Campaign for over a decade now. Carla and Dr. Rosales have provided, I think, like a really amazing overview of the organizing, power building, the legal frameworks, and the informal arrangements and struggles. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we think about, how we use, how we operate inside and outside of the law, especially when the law itself is the problem and is the source of harm. And so to do that, I'm going to talk about the role that lawyers have played in the street vending movement, not to center lawyers in the story, but in fact the opposite, to try to talk about how we might think about law and lawyers differently in social justice movements, and instead look to the community organizing and movement activism as the basis for actual legal and political transformation. And so to start, it's actually really about unlearning, I think, what we've been conditioned to think about the law. There's this concept of legal liberalism, which is this kind of dominant idea that the law is rational, it's neutral, right? It's apolitical, it's colorblind. And really it just takes a crusading hero civil rights lawyer and a wise judge to enforce your rights in order to find justice and change the world. And I think in many spaces, we've kind of internalized this notion through media, and in many ways, it was kind of the dominant narrative around like big civil rights impact litigation, like Brown v. Board of Education. But if you see this sign around town and you know the history behind it, then it's actually easy to see how the law is not rational or political or neutral or colorblind, but it instead reflects the priorities of power, and it's heavily politicized. It's often designed in a way that is then weaponized against low-income communities and people of color. And so I think this critical analysis of the role of law has been gaining some steam in the years since the civil rights litigation era, and there have been some really important and influential critiques of the tenets of legal liberalism. And so in the 80s or the 70s and 80s, there was a group of legal scholars that began really shining a light on how that these efforts were intended to address to begin with. And then, critical race theory scholars have expanded this critique in really important ways by arguing that our very narrow focus on enforcing rights, it actually obscures the many complicated ways that racism is deeply embedded in laws and structures. And then people like Gerald Lopez, who wrote the seminal book Rebellious Lawyering, argue for a different kind of lawyering that rejects these models of hierarchy and expertise, and instead he argues for more of a partnership between lawyers and clients, where they share power and combine this overlapping practical knowledge of the world in order to solve these problems of subordination. And this approach kind of creates the foundation for a model that is known as movement lawyering. You may hear about movement lawyering, community lawyering, cause lawyering, rebellious lawyering, revolutionary lawyering. But there's many different names, but the idea is and there's a lot of definitions out there, but I'm going to share two that I like. The first is from Betty Hung, and it's more about the intangibles, about how we show up in movement spaces with humility and love and a very intentional relinquishing of privileges. And then this definition from Scott Cummings, who has been name dropped already, shows the elements of what the practice really looks like and from a day-to-day practice. And he focuses on the lawyer's accountability to movement leaders, which probably sounds really obvious here, but if you go to law school or if you've been to law school, you'll know it's actually a pretty fundamental shift. And he talks about the primacy of power building as the thing, right? And in many ways more important than legal wins or winning a case or passing a policy, but really thinking about how do you do that in service of building community power. And then this idea of integrated advocacy, where multiple tools are used at once in multiple different arenas, legal arenas, non-legal arenas, and that the legal strategies themselves are actually just one small strand of a much more comprehensive approach. This probably sounds great, sounds easy, but it is a pretty fundamental shift from how we've been taught to be lawyers and how we've been conditioned to think about the law and lawyers for generations. And so it's a really important kind of pivot to decenter the law, to recognize the flaws of putting the law on a pedestal, but really thinking about how do legal strategies fit within a much broader set of and comprehensive approach, and to really sort of be in service of community-led and organizer-led movement building. And so these elements, the accountability, integrated advocacy, and power building, I think give us a good scaffolding to kind of talk about a little bit about how the lawyers engaged in the street vendor campaign and the street vendor movement. And so first, in terms of accountability, so one of the first things when we stepped into the LA street vendor campaign space, as Carla mentioned, one of the first things that we did was really draw on like classic corporate law tools and repurpose them in a way that could create conditions for vendors to play leadership roles. And so we use tools like governance structures, bylaws, things that like big companies use, things that organizations use. We took those ideas and concepts and helped create governance structures for the coalition, which created an official mechanism for street vendors to play a leadership role in the coalition, in the steering committee, creating a steering committee structure, making sure that street vendors are in that space, creating advisory panels, creating expert panels to lead policies and policy development, and really kind of trying to reject this notion that lawyers are policy experts, but instead creating vendor expert panels to do the work of drafting legislation and shaping strategy, and really tried to kind of decenter these legal and policy strategies, not to frame this as like, this is a campaign to change the law, or this is a campaign, this is a policy campaign, but really, we're doing this, we're thinking about these legal tactics and situating them among multiple overlapping and coordinated other tactics. Which I think kind of brings us to this idea of integrated advocacy, which is really about breaking down the divisions, the classic divisions between lawyers and non-lawyers, and breaking down divisions between litigation, which is often prioritized, and other forms of legal advocacy, and then these divisions between courts and then other spaces where laws are made and enforced and norms are generated. And so in the campaign, the lawyers in the coalition, the lawyers we were coalition members, not driving the agenda, but also not sort of staying away and waiting for someone to call us when there was a legal question. We were one of many different organizations bringing unique skills and trying to support. And sometimes that meant stepping forward when the moment was right for a legal strategy. And sometimes that meant stepping back and being in the background and taking notes and setting up folding chairs and doing all the other things you do as a partner, as a member of a coalition. And sometimes the legal strategy was upfront, but often the movement leads with a different tactic. And Carla mentioned the civil disobedience right here on the lower right, where the lawyers play a much smaller background role, like legal observing, and we rely on that powerful tool and tactic to raise awareness and build momentum for the movement. And then when it is time for the legal or policy strategy, we try to be really unlimited in where we look, rather than coming in and saying, okay, I'm a litigator, let us know when you have a lawsuit. It's really about being able to draw on a menu of a variety of different legal and policy strategies, depending on whatever the circumstances call for. So, there are times when we sue the city, and that's the move. And then there are other times where it's about producing legal analysis in a policy report or a policy white paper. Sometimes it's direct representation in legal clinics, helping vendors with the citations. And then often it's policy advocacy at many different scales, right? So we've advocated at the city, at the county, at the state, sometimes even in the same day, and always trying to be coordinated in all of these different tactics. And all of this is really kind of geared towards, I think, what is maybe the most important element of this movement lawyering model, which is reorienting legal strategies around shifting power. And this is different than legal work in service of a legal victory. And it sometimes requires us to change how we think about success. So the question becomes, instead of how do we win this case or how do we pass this policy, but how do we use the process of litigating a case or passing a policy to actually meaningfully shift and redistribute power dynamics? And that often means slowing down to create conditions for street vendors to step into leadership and power. And I can remember, a lot of moments over the years when I would feel the urge to try to accelerate our process because maybe there felt like, oh, there's a political opening here, we've got to take it. But doing that would have moved the policy faster than the power and leadership development. And so it's been really important to have partners like Carla to help us stay connected to our North Star, work in coordination and collaboration, and really just like maintain this focus on how are we changing the underlying power dynamics that created this injustice in the first place? Because if we change the policy without changing those dynamics, it's not going to do very many people any good. And so what this has looked like in practice is really trying to use the privilege that we have as lawyers in these spaces to push back and to contest these traditional notions of expertise. And I think, you know, it's easier for people who look like me to be considered policy experts. But that's backwards, right? We're talking about folks who have been systematically shut out of our economy, but nevertheless, despite that, built thriving local economies and complex arrangements to share public space, right? These are the greatest experts we have on what a successful street vending program could look like. And so we need to remake our policymaking systems to actually honor that expertise and be led by that expertise. And so we try to model that on a smaller scale by, you know, creating a vendor expert panel. Carla was mentioning SB 972. You know, we had a group of vendors that would come together every week, often more often than that, who would sit down and they would shape our political strategy. They would shape, you know, the contours of the law that we were trying to advance. And it was a cross section of vendors from across the region, across the state, different types of food, bringing their experiences and expertise in a way that, like, I would never have known these dynamics, that, you know, assembly members and senators would never know these nuances. It really required that lived experience and expertise. And so we've tried to create the conditions for that in the coalition space, so that we're not just legalizing street vending, we're not just decriminalizing street vending, we're doing it in a way so that the street vendor movement has greater power for the next fight, because it's always going to be these concentric circles of change. And so can we get this win in a way that builds our power for the next win, and so on and so on. And so I've been trying to think about what this looks like, and have worked with Professor Cummings, who we mentioned before, who wrote one of the definitions, to try to think about this idea of policy by the people. How do we rethink policymaking and the process of policymaking, but really reorient it around these ideas of power building and movement building? And so, and what does that mean for a lawyer? What is the role of the lawyer? It's in many ways, it is decentering the policy outcomes, decentering the law, but thinking about how do we isolate each of these phases of policy development, and then what are the specific legal tools, legal instruments, lawyering skills that can be brought to bear to do this in a way that is building power and supporting movement building. And I'll close with, I think, just a couple of maybe reflections or lessons. And one is this, I don't know if it's a tension, but I'm continuously grappling with how to navigate, how to navigate systems change and direct assistance. So I think a lot of the things we've been talking about today, you know, we're talking about like transforming unjust structures and systems. And this is necessary work, but it is long-term work. This is a long-term horizon work that requires a lot of steps to build that power and to do that deep systems change, which is really, really important. But also, as we are doing that, and as we are building towards that, people are suffering today, right? And you know, it's this constant tension, this constant struggle where we are in these spaces dreaming about the world we want to build, and a vendor comes in with a dozen citations for hundreds of dollars each, and that's financial catastrophe for that person and their family. And so how do we as lawyers, how do we as organizers, as advocates, how do we create the space to be responsive to that while also keeping our eye on this bigger North Star? And so it requires this constant recalibration in a way that is really challenging. And then the other thing I would just say is that, like, and this has really been reinforced in the last couple of years, but when we talk about systems change and transformation, it has to include culture change. And Carla told the story about SB 946, SB 972. You know, we changed the law in a really dramatic way, you know, and it was almost overnight. You know, one day street vending was completely prohibited and illegal everywhere in California. And if you did it, you would get a misdemeanor criminal charge. And then SB 946 passed. And as soon as that law went into effect, no one could get a criminal penalty the next day. And every jurisdiction, every city and county had to legalize street vending. And so on paper, the law changed in a really, really fundamental way. But at the end of the day, it's still people who are working at cities and counties who implement and enforce these laws. And we see these awful comments from elected officials. Down here, I highlighted a couple, and these are people several years after the law has changed, still openly talking about street vendors in this way and talking about how to exclude vendors from their economy and from their community. And so we need to change the laws, we need to change the systems, and that's the first step. But we also need to keep our eye on the narrative communications and organizing and whatever else it takes to also change hearts and minds. And if not hearts and minds change, think about who are the right people to be implementing these laws and programs, because without that culture change, there's a limit to the impact of the legal change. But I don't want to end on a negative note. I am confident that we will get there, but that we will get there because we are being led by organizing and movement building and honoring the expertise of the vendor community.
Applause, everybody, virtual applause. Oh my God, that was brilliant. I have to go to law school. If I can score higher than 155 on the LSAT, I think I'll apply. But I don't know, something about, yeah. But thank you, Doug. That was brilliant. So let me recap just a few points in a non-rank order manner. You know, Professor and lawyer Doug Smith talked about the role of law and actually demystifying law and what law is, and like reframing it in different ways. Mentioning issues of critical race theories with a lawyer actually was critical in writing about this theory. The importance of public interest law. So raise your hand, any potential lawyers in the house, any of the undergrads want to go to law school? Give me a thumbs up. Or receive the master's or PhD. Don't get a PhD because you're gonna owe a lot of money. I hope there's, because we have a lawyer in the house here. Also, the importance that when lawyers enter campaigns, for them not to take over the campaigns because they disempower organizing, right? Because if everybody depends on the lawyer, then there's no development in terms of the people themselves to become leaders. So lawyers should be in the service of movements, not the other way around. And this is something that is modeled by Doug and other lawyers, like our good friend Doug Scott. And also helping with, we live in a bureaucracy, and people, if you don't master the rules of America, you're never going to succeed. You have to master, how does it work? Once you master it, then you manipulate those laws to your advantage. Creating these structures for the street vending campaign in terms of the governance, and rejecting this idea that the lawyers are the experts, they're the go-to people. Now, if you're dealing with my people, the Mexican people, I'm only speaking about my people because we get together every Thursday in taco trucks at 3 in the morning, all 36 million of us. And if you have a PhD, and if you're a teacher, if you're a lawyer, they always say, usted dígame qué hacer. You tell me what to do. And when you fall into that trap, you're doing them more harm. They said, no, juntos vamos a hacer. Because people that, like my parents, bracero, domestic worker, with no education, no formal education, they too have knowledge. And what Scott was talking about in terms, I'm getting all passionate, I'm not even a panelist. What Scott was talking about in terms of that beautiful, and Carla and everybody that was part of this campaign, to create these panels, these experts of panels of the street vendors themselves. This is what Gramsci, I just Googled Gramsci right now. This is what Gramsci talked about, the organic intellectuals. And this is what's beautiful about this movement. I'm starting to cry because I wasn't even involved in it, and I was just from the outside. And now that I'm hearing from these stories, it just makes the campaign that much more beautiful in terms of the knowledge that they're sharing with us. So, thank you for that. And then breaking these divisions between lawyer, non-lawyer, and we're all a coalition. We all have equal vote. We all have one vote. We're all in it together, and everybody's contributing to this coalition building. And if you have to sue the city and using those legal analysis, this is why it's important that those of you who are undergrads here at Cal Poly Pomona, one of the greatest universities of all time, before I got here, it was okay. It was okay. But now that I got here, it's a great university. So let's be clear. Before now, when I got here, all the horses were white. We didn't even have brown horses. We spray painted some, now some are brown and black. So now there's more diversity. Going back to the presentation with Scott, looking at these clinics and supporting them, shifting the power in terms of instead of where the goal is power building, from the ground up, not from the top down, and modeling these behaviors and everything. So as far as I'm concerned, and I'm an expert in all of these areas, because I watch all these law programs and CSI and all that. As far as I'm concerned, we just heard from three brilliant presenters from three different aspects of. There's really what we're talking about, like three different master classes all in one. And I'm going to talk to the professor here, Dr. Ham, about like charging people that are in this class. There's about 56 of you, because this is a lot of knowledge, and it's not free, people. This is knowledge here, so I need to get some money out of this. Speaking about the informal economy, so I take EBT and all that stuff. Okay. All jokes aside, I'm telling you, they're not going to invite me to moderate anymore. It's like, what is he talking about half the time? Does he really have a PhD? He didn't go to Berkeley, did he? Questions, preguntas? I know we had one earlier, but I wanted to leave the questions to the end. And I know we had one earlier about the professor's book. You could look at a UC Press or Amazon. So one question Gabriel asked, did the fruteros choose that sector of street vending, or was it easier to sell fruit over other merchandise? So let's say, Profe Rosales.
Hi, I really enjoyed everyone else's presentation. Thanks so much again to the panelists. I tried to get the history of how these poblanos got into fruit vending, and the sort of origin story that I got was a poblano who came in the 1980s, brought, this style of vending, started doing it, employed his own family, and then started employing other paisanos. But I really want to make the link to the other presentations before we move on, because like one of the things that I wrote in my book was an afterword, because my book is published in 2020, right? As all these things are changing and happening. And one of the big things that I say in the afterword is that the election of Trump was the dark cloud. This was a silver lining, the legalization, all the policies that happened, but the silver lining came on the very dark cloud of Trump, right? He represented an existential threat to immigrants across the country. And one of the things that I think is really interesting and also problematic about the new era that we're facing now with legalization is that in the midst of legalizing street vendors, we have the rise of business improvement districts, right? And like a privatization of policing in areas like downtown, where you have private police forces who definitely harass vendors far more than the LAPD. And so after the legalization, I remember reading an article that said the Bureau of Street Services was suggesting that fines should be increased for those who break the rules moving forward. And the city had proposed hiring more inspectors and administrative staffers at the Bureau. And so the way that I write about this in the afterword is like, it seems like we're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, right? Legalizing, but also increasing the fines and increasing the number of inspectors who can target vendors. And so I, to a certain degree, don't explain what happens, or nobody can explain, right? We're in this really tricky position right now where the city and vendors are trying to figure out what to do. And as an academic, I basically, my role is just to sit back and watch other people do and analyze what they do. And that's why I'm so appreciative of the efforts that Carla and Doug both put into this effort, because you guys are the action and I'm basically just the documentarian, right, in all of this. So I'm very thankful for their presentations. And I actually have a question to both of you, which is like, what, as you know, putting on my academic hat, what do you all think is next for the vendors, or like what are the biggest obstacles moving forward? And I ask this also as somebody who still has contact with the fruit vendors, because like what information can I relay to them about what's coming next?
Okay, so we have 10 minutes, so why don't we have Carla answer that question, and then Doug, or if Doug passes, we can see if someone else from the Q&A. So why don't we do that?
I feel like our answers would be different.
Okay, no, that's fine. Go ahead.
Real short, and I'll do it really short too.
Yeah, the tag team like Lucha Libre, Carla, and then Doug.
Okay, I can go first. I think what's next, so there's implementation happening now for the state law that was changed, right? So the state law now includes street vendors. It makes it easier for vendors to have access to the equipment that they need. It actually did make changes for fruit vendors specifically. So vendors can now cut fruit on the stand. Before, it was illegal for vendors to cut fruit. They had to bring it packaged, which was a big deal for them. So it's just getting connected to us just to get informed on like, what are the changes? How do the changes benefit them? How can they get access to the equipment, to the technical assistance, all of that. I think for us at CPC specifically, just like the continued organizing. So for us, like vendors are going to continue to be attacked. These statewide changes are going to help thousands of vendors, but it's still not going to help everyone. You know, I think what's most important for us is protecting the decriminalization. And I have a feeling that every year or every 2 years, we're going to see an attempt at the state level to try to bring back criminalization. It's already like happened a couple times. So defending the decriminalization piece, and just organizing vendors. Like we're in 27 hubs. So a lot of the things, a lot of the issues, a lot of the engagement with police or even the business improvement district, like officers, can be mitigated if folks are organized on the ground. If folks like know how to defend themselves, if they know their rights, if they know how to protect each other, or if they just have agreements about how they're organized on the street. So that's a lot of the work that we do, is day-to-day, like how do we get set up to mitigate issues and to like make sure that we like have autonomy and control over our vending areas and not like let the police come in and say how we should be doing things, right? So that's for us, what's most important is the organizing.
Yeah, and I'll co-sign everything that that Carla said, especially around implementation and unfortunately around playing defense on these games. The one thing I'll add is that you mentioned the anecdote about the Bureau of Street Services and the city trying to increase the funding for enforcement. And to me, that's like a great example of what I was kind of getting at with this idea of the culture change as well, because the law is written in a way that you would think if you were an alien who came to Earth and read the law, you would think, oh, this is, you know, we're welcoming street vendors into the economy. But the people who are doing this work, who are tasked with enforcing it, they come from a completely different mindset. They're still stuck in that mindset that this is a nuisance. This is something that we need to clear off the street. It doesn't fit the aesthetic that we want, especially in gentrifying neighborhoods. And so there's just so much work to be done to have the sort of execution of the law meet the spirit of the law. And I think that's a little bit of like education and narrative work, and also holding cities accountable when they are acting in a way that is inconsistent. And that's going to be difficult but important next steps, I think, too.
Thank you, Doug and Carla, about regarding those responses. Carla, do you mind putting in the chat your organization, just in case people want to contact your group and seek that help. The next question, I think if we look at the chat, is maybe Carla can help us with this one. It talks, someone's asking, Naomi's asking about how to use social media. If you could just read from the chat. So let's just limit it to Carla. That way we can have other people pose questions in the meantime as she's looking at that. You see that, Carla?
Yeah, I see this.
So can you
Yeah.
restate the question before you answer it? And in the meantime,
Yeah.
the audience can pose questions.
I'm reading here, like, what are our thoughts on social media to protect vendors? So I think there has been like an increase of like awareness on attacks on vendors on social media. Sometimes it's being uplifted as like, oh, there's an increased attack on vendors. These attacks have been happening for many years, but now you see them on social media. So I mean, I think for us, it's important to bring awareness to the plight of the vendor, and to know what the vendor is going through. It's not necessarily like our tactic to like follow up with folks who are doing those attacks and like call them out and shame them on social media. I know that's some of the stuff that we're seeing. Our focus is changing systems and helping vendors get organized. Our focus is not necessarily providing a service to vendors, or like whenever we see one of those attacks and there's a GoFundMe posted, yes, we share it. Yes, we let our vendor members know so that they can also uplift it among their folks. But our focus is like really transforming the system and making sure that vendors feel like they can protect themselves, right? That they have the tools to not just protect themselves from people who are going to attack them, but the police and the city, because the fact that the city keeps attacking them and giving them tickets makes other people think that these folks are okay, like to be attacked, like these folks are vulnerable, these folks are not recognized or legitimate. So yeah, I think it can be helpful, to uplift like the issues that vendors are going through, but it's not necessarily our focus.
So social media is key. It's very important. A lot of street vendors are assaulted and they're robbed because the criminals out there, and I'm not talking about the cops because they're a criminal component too. The criminals out, they know they have cash, so they target them and they're vulnerable. Because if you're undocumented, you get robbed, you're not going to go to the cops, right? And then they're going to beat you. So either way, so it's very important that we respect them as human beings first and foremost. Okay, otra pregunta. We have like 4 more minutes, maybe one more question. Someone can translate pregunta. I don't think our audience is bilingual here. A pregunta. Jalapenos. Come on, y'all. Any questions? I see like 2 of my students are here, so we got a few ways. Okay, so we have 3 minutes. Why don't we have Dr. Ham? I'm probably butchering your name, so if you could just correct me. If you can please just give us a wrap up this presentation, and before she does that, I want everybody to give our panelists and Professor Ham, because she's one of the organizers, apart from others, Professor Mavdav and others. Round of applause, everybody. Come on, y'all, we didn't even charge you, so applause. We should, I'm telling you. We could get like
So
easy.
I'm not trying to take away from myself, but there is a quick question in the
Oh, okay. Why don't you go ahead and
I don't know if we can quickly answer it, because I do want to make sure I wrap up and respect everyone's time. Julia Jacobo asked, what are the statistics of vendor crimes? Is that a statistic that's available from Carla, Rosie, or Doug that you know of? Because I know sometimes getting this kind of data it's not always publicly available, or difficult, or not captured.
I want to say what I know, and then maybe Doug can add to it. But I know that when I was in the field and I would see the vendors' tickets, sometimes, so I was trying to figure out how many tickets are given to vendors because of this anti-vending law. But the tickets that the vendors would receive would sometimes be for littering, public nuisance, for all like a range of things, so that even if you did a search for anti-vending, for breaking that specific municipal code, vendors sometimes got littering, citations, or, public nuisance citations. And so I realized very quickly that it was going to be almost next to impossible to figure out just how many vendors are cited for this specific thing. And I don't know, Doug, is there any ways to like systematically categorize the ways that vendors are being cited, and then also like the ways that vendors are being harassed if they get, assaulted while vending on the street?
Yeah, it's really, really hard for all the reasons you mentioned, and it's because we are talking about street vending and street vending citations, but what we're really talking about is criminalization of poverty, and there's so many ways that plays out. And it can be a sidewalk vending citation, but nuisance laws are used. I mean, it's a tactic that is used to target low income people, and it's weaponized, and so it's hard to get the data. It's hard to get the data because of that. It's also hard to get data because so much goes unreported because this is informal sector. And what we always try to do, we get these questions a lot, and every time there's a violent assault that gets makes headlines, people will reach out to us, and for us it's really important to, for all the reasons that Carla described, but also to bring it back to the structural issues, right? That like, this is happening in part because we have laws and systems that dehumanize street vendors. And so that is going to make it a lot easier for people to do the same. And so you can't really separate these isolated incidents from a system that is dehumanizing itself. But in terms of the raw data, it's really difficult for all of the reasons you already identified.
The problem with that, this is on purpose. Okay, the state is the problem. When we look for the state for solutions, that's the problem. Like the police, they manipulate. You cannot rely on the police in terms of the data. One, they didn't go to graduate school, so they don't know statistics. Number two, it's unreliable. It's really unreliable. It's like asking the Spaniards, that the Aztecs do human sacrifices. You're asking the colonizer to give you the information. They do it on purpose because they're not here to protect street vendors. There's no laws to protect them. There's no data. It's on purpose. It's deliberate because they're criminalized, because they're brown people, because this idea of illegality. I mean, these are hardworking people. And this is how we treat them. I mean, really, we have limited resources. Why can't the cops arrest child molesters and drug dealers and white nationalists like Tucker? Like why do we focus on the little person just trying to make a living? So even if the data is that, I don't trust it because the police historically has manipulated the data to their benefit. When they need money, there's high crime. And when they have a lot, the budget is high, and then they manipulate it to that. So for the students here in the audience, and I hate to be this way, but it's the truth. We have to be critical, and you cannot rely on the state. You have to rely on the organizers, on the people themselves, and is to fight against the state so that we defend ourselves.
Okay.
I know I'm going to get fired, but luckily I have tenure. But it doesn't matter to me. Because what matters is those on the bottom, those the marginalized, not those of us who are educated and are protected. So we need to look out for their interests. But these are really great questions, and take it away.
Yeah, and thank you. I think this is a larger kind of question too about who owns research, who doesn't, and just the process of that as well too. But I want to thank everyone for being here today, for Rocio, Carla, and Doug, and Alvaro. This panel, just to wrap it up, was kind of to bring different perspectives, the sociological, the academic perspective from Rocio, the organizing perspective from Carla, and the legal perspective from Doug. So really appreciate having this kind of I'm going to use an academic term, kind of interdisciplinary, but kind of cross-sector, kind of different way of kind of understanding the kind of community, street vendor community, and kind of the policy issues around this. So thank you, everyone. Again, I'm going to drop some links in the chat for Rocio's book, the CPC, their Instagram, and their website, as well as link to the Public Council and Doug's email, as well as some of the CCEP socials again. So thank you again. Have a good evening, and we'll see you, CCEP will see you next year. Bye, folks.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Bye, hasta luego.